for her to willingly go meet him, there must have been some sort of emotional connection between her and him, which is what a groomer knows how to do with kids in this age group.
A 16-year-old girl missing for nearly 1 week after meeting a 30-year-old man online.
Then at some point he convinced her to meet him or go someplace where he could have personal interaction with her.
What started as a missing and endangered report quickly escalated to an Amber Alert.
It looks like she was lured via the internet, and that's why they pushed it up to the next level.
Now, investigators will take a closer look at the suspect's online history.
And that's what they're going to be looking for is obviously evidence of this crime, but they want to make sure there's no other victims out there. Their number one objective is to stop any other further harm or find other victims.
This is 16-year-old Autumn Nicole Lyon. She lives in Mineral Springs, Arkansas, near the borders of both Louisiana and Texas. She was last seen on Wednesday, July 24th at about 8:30 p.m. At the time, she was with 30-year-old Adrian Garces, her accused abductor.
It sounds like that she was met online and she was groomed, probably. There was probably a relationship that went on for some time. And then he likely convinced her to meet at a certain location. And then obviously he abducted her.
That's retired FBI agent Colin Schmidt, who weighed in on Autumn's case.
There certainly was some sort of probably a long-term relationship where he had to start slow and then move to the point where he could actually make her or get her to meet him someplace.
Autumn was last seen with Garces on July 24th, but she was reported missing on July 27th. She was last seen on a Wednesday and wasn't reported missing until Saturday, so that's several days. Do you think that's a big deal in terms of the time lapse between when she was last seen and then reported missing?
Well, if she was an adult, then they might say, well, there was consent for her to go there. But a 16-year-old can't consent because they're still a child. A child can't consent to this type of a relationship. So on its face, it's automatically something of a criminal nature. But like I said, if she had been an adult, they may have said, well, it was consensual, and that's why it wasn't reported for 4 or 5 days. But in this case, it was, like I said, it can't be consensual, and I don't think that's going to really come into play in terms of the investigation.
To start, a basic alert was put out for Autumn's disappearance, but things quickly changed as the investigation went on. Originally, she was reported as missing or endangered, and then investigators upped this to an Amber Alert. What do you think would have caused them to up it, so to speak, to the most severe thing for a missing child?
Well, the responding officers may have gone in there and looked at her internet or looked at maybe it was open to the chat. And when they saw that, I'm just speculating, of course, they might have said, okay, we've got a problem here. It looks like she was lured via the internet, and that's why they pushed it up to the next level. Just speculating.
Investigators quickly zeroed in on Garces, who Autumn was last seen with, and they soon announced the pair met online. What do you think this would look like in terms of their online relationship? How would they have even run into each other online, and then what would that grooming look like?
Well, he was probably trolling on sites that he knows that this age group is on, and then he would try to elicit personal information and start very, very small, and then lead up to a relationship. And basically, grooming is basically trying to entice the person. It's a complicated way of saying being somebody's friend, but being somebody's friend with a malintent or a bad intent. And so that's what he was doing, is trying to get that relationship and get to the point where he could actually get her to meet him someplace. And frankly, this is a big problem with the internet with kids that aren't very sophisticated. Is like we used to tell our kids, and what my mom told me, don't talk to strangers.
Schmidt says as part of the search for Autumn, investigators would take a deep dive into her history. I know that investigators are likely going through all of her cell phone history, her internet history, everything that she has here. But is it possible that this could have been in the works for many weeks or months, that he's kind of building up to lure her away from her home?
Likely it went on for several months. It wouldn't go so quickly where it was just 1 or 2 interactions and then she would meet with him, because she's still going to be suspicious of his intent on the front end. And then at some point he convinced her that no, it's not that way. and got her to meet him or go someplace where he could have personal interaction with her.
From an outsider's perspective, there are obvious differences between Autumn and her alleged abductor, but Schmidt says his grooming techniques likely minimized these differences. We have a 16-year-old girl who's obviously underage. She's still a child. And then the perpetrator here is 30. There is obviously a significant age difference here, number one. And number two, we have a child and then an adult. So what would be some of the things that he would say to her to kind of coax her fears? I mean, in the back of her mind, I'm sure she knows that this would be illegal. He's an adult, she's a child. But would he maybe convince her that this was fine?
Well, the first part is he probably didn't tell her the age difference. She may have thought she was talking to another 16-year-old in terms of the interactions. And then he would say things to her that he knows would entice or make him attractive to a 16-year-old, which also leads me to believe that he's probably done this before or attempted to do this before. So when they get his internet history, they're going to see he's most likely very prolific on these type of sites that these teenagers go to.
After Autumn's disappearance, officials put out photos of this vehicle, a gray Ford F-150 that had Texas plates. Garces's last known address was in Texas, and officials believed he may have taken Autumn across state lines. I'm wondering how they were actually able to track down the perpetrator. They might have been able to find his username and all of that, but how would they have actually found his name and where he might be located?
Well, not knowing the details of the case, they may have seen the interactions and also was able to get his IP address, which they can track back to a router, and the router may have been sitting in his house, and that's how they got back to him. Or he may have just done something as simple as put his address in there when he was interacting with her, and they just went to his address.
Investigators caught up with Garces on Monday, July 29th in Grand Prairie, Texas. He was charged with interference with custody, which is denying a parent's right to see their child.
Likely what happens in these cases is they'll do a holding charge, maybe something that's somewhat relatively benign to what they're investigating, just so they have time to go ahead and get all the facts together for a bigger charge.
That leads into my next question, because the charges in my head would be abduction, potentially, if we find out this happened, sexual assault or physical assault, depending on what occurred while she was away from her family. So do you think that more charges could be coming down the pipeline?
I do, based upon the kind of the minimum facts that I got. And if it had been interstate or she had traveled over a state line, then that would have been something for the FBI or for Homeland Security investigators to look into.
And we talked about potential charges that he could face down the line, whether the investigation reveals sexual or physical assault, whatever it may be. But is it possible that he also could face an ICAC charge, internet crimes against children?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is most likely what they're looking at right now. And if the FBI or HSI get involved, that'll be the focus of their investigation, is proving that up. So because the penalties for that are pretty stiff compared to things that are on the state books.
While Garces was arrested in Grand Prairie, Texas, Autumn was found elsewhere. Originally, investigators said she may be in Leonard, Texas, about an hour north of Dallas, but it's unclear where exactly she was rescued. So we still don't know a lot of specific details about this case because the arrest just happened a couple of days ago. It was reported yesterday. But what we do know is where he was arrested versus where she was rescued was different. They were different cities within the state of Texas. We don't really know why. Do you have any idea why that could be, that he was arrested in one area and then she was found somewhere else?
Well, in that case, they may have talked to somebody and said he was over on this X versus that X. So I think it was just a matter of just doing good police work to find him, and then they were able to track him down and arrest him. As
for the reason behind Autumn's disappearance, that's still a question mark. What do you think his motive would be in this case? I can kind of speculate what it would potentially be, but is that something investigators are probably considering?
Well, the motive doesn't necessarily come into play because it's on its face, it's a crime, what he did. And it's a crime on its face because there is no good motive for what he did. So likely his motive was of was to harm her in one way or the other. So I think either way, it doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is that she was enticed on the internet. She went and met somebody, and hopefully something bad didn't happen while she was with him.
We still don't know all the details of the case, but according to Schmidt, Autumn was likely groomed, and that could have affected her thought process. Do you think it's possible that in this case, this 16-year-old girl thought that she was actually in love with this 30-year-old guy?
Well, like I said, it'd be speculating to say that, and without seeing the chats and the communications between the two. But for her to willingly go meet him, there must have been some sort of emotional connection between her and him, which is what a groomer knows how to do with kids in this age group.
You had mentioned this before, but it sounds like the suspect in this case may have had a history with grooming or speaking to underage girls. Do you think that's what investigators are going to be looking through when they come through his phone records or his online accounts, what he was doing, that they could potentially find additional victims?
Yeah, and that's what they're going to be looking for is obviously um, evidence of this crime, but they want to make sure there's no other victims out there or anybody he's also grooming right now that might be in the pipeline. Because their number one objective is to stop any other further harm or find other victims that they can bring him to justice for.
So there's still a question mark in terms of Garces's relationship with Autumn or whether he was in contact with other underage girls. But there are some aspects of the case that are crystal clear. We do know that she was from Arkansas. That's where she was last seen, and then later found in Texas. So she did cross state lines. Does that make this potentially a federal case?
Yeah, it's a federal case on its face because under the Mann Act, if there was something of sexual nature, then she was enticed. Also, being a minor, there's also laws on the books for that as well. Enticement of a minor over state lines. So, like I said, the FBI or Homeland Security investigators will, at some point, likely take a look at this and see if it's something that they want to do if they aren't already, because the penalties for that a lot of times are much higher than it is in the state.
And this does make it federal because we have multiple states involved. So does that mean that the FBI or HSI is automatically involved in the investigation?
It's not automatic. It's kind of up to them if they want to take it over, and it's also up to the responding or arresting officers or the detectives. They would have to necessarily work with the FBI, because the FBI and the HSI don't swoop in and take cases anymore like you see in the movies. It's a collaboration between the agencies, the federal and the state, to see what's in the best interest of the community.
Moving forward, Schmidt says investigators will talk with both Autumn and Garces to learn more about what happened while she was away. And I'm sure that investigators were asking him questions. It's unclear whether he has retained an attorney, whether he was cooperative or not. But we do know that they likely spoke to the 16-year-old girl, at least to find out details about what she went through on the days that she was missing. What do you think that sort of interview would have looked like? Because I'm sure investigators would want to be sensitive to what she just went through.
Well, they're going to use many times a female investigator or detective, and somebody that's very sensitive to these and has experience with these cases, because you don't want to make the incident worse. And they're certainly going to be compassionate, but also they're going to be thorough, because generally speaking, that first interview is the most important, because that's when they're going to get the best information. Because after a while, the victim may become overwhelmed with grief or fear because of what happened to her. So I'm sure these investigators did a fantastic forensic interview with her and got all the details. And with that, they're going to be able to put a strong case on this guy. There's a high probability that he's going to talk and try to talk his way out of it and minimize what happened. And that's where the investigators will get fantastic information.
Schmidt says Autumn's story is an important reminder for kids, but also their parents. And I know this is something you mentioned about it, talking to your kids or what your mom told you. My parents certainly told me don't talk to strangers. And in school, we even learned about internet crimes against children or talking to strangers online. So does this story really bring to light a larger issue that kids, even in this day and age, are still talking to strangers online?
Absolutely. The computer, basically, when I was a kid, you didn't talk to strangers at the mall. Well, now the strangers are literally in your living room, and you have access to them through all these Discord or any of these other sites and some of the more dark websites. So, absolutely, kids need to be trained. Do not talk to strangers. If you don't know who's on the other line, if they say they're 12 or 14, there's a high probability they're actual adults, and a lot of the sites, especially Discord, are making significant inroads in identifying those groomers and kicking them off the sites.
As a former teenage girl myself, I know that they can be sometimes obstinate or ignore what their parents say. But do you have any sort of ideas for what parents should be directing their kids to do, or tips and tricks for how to keep them safe?
Well, have conversations with your kids. Talk to them about what they're doing online. Put the computers in a public place in terms of your house where you can kind of look over their shoulder and see what they're doing. And a lot of times it's just checking in. If you have a child that's in their room for 8, 12 hours a day during the summer online and they're chatting with people, then that's time for you to go in and say, who are you talking to?
Right now, Garces is being detained in Texas and is awaiting extradition back to Arkansas. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.